Hello. Today we're going to continue talking about the innate immune system, but this video focuses on the second line of defense, which is our internal defenses. So if you recall, the first line of defense is our surface barriers. That would be our skin and our intact mucous membranes. But what happens if you get a cut and then your surface barrier has been breached? Well, after that, we have our internal defenses to be able to take over. And the internal defenses consist of cells and chemicals. Let's start by talking about the cells first. One category of cells are called phagocytes. Phage means eat, so these are cells that are able to engulf a pathogen and basically break them down. One specific type of phagocytes that we should be familiar with are neutrophils. Neutrophils are white blood cells. They're actually the most abundant type of white blood cells, and that's important because we need a lot of them because after they engulf a pathogen, it actually kills them. So they're kind of like on a suicide mission for our body. Another type of white blood cell is a macrophage. Macro means big, so literally like big eaters. And this is the most voracious type of phagocyte. They're much more robust than neutrophils, and they're able to survive to continue killing pathogen, unlike our little neutrophils. And in this image, we can see this macrophage right here is pulling in bacteria, and then it's going to engulf them. And I want to recommend that you watch this video. It has a hilarious narrator and it shows phagocytosis. Another type of cells are natural killer cells. So these are not phagocytic cells. They're able to kill by directly contacting the target cell and causing it to commit apoptosis or programmed cell death. And they're called natural killer cells because the natural is supposed to mean that they're non-specific. So they will kill anything they find that doesn't have a self-antigen on it. This is a good thing because it means they can kill cancer cells and virus-infected cells before the adaptive immune system is activated. The adaptive immune system, that's our specific arm. It's great, but it takes time because it has to meet the pathogen and get to know it. So while that's occurring, the natural killer cells are traveling around doing their thing. In addition to cells, we're also going to talk about chemicals. And the second line of defense consists of inflammation. This is how our body responds to being injured, and it signals the immune system to heal and repair the damaged tissues. You have probably experienced inflammation before. If you have a cut and then the area becomes kind of red, swollen, hot to the touch, maybe a little bit painful, those are our signs of inflammation. And the pain typically keeps us from moving the area, so impaired function is another sign that goes along with it. The swelling is caused by a chemical called histamine that's released. Histamines act on capillaries and they cause them to vasodilate, or they cause the capillaries to basically open more, and that makes them more permeable. That's a good thing because we want our white blood cells to be able to leave the capillary and go to the site of the tissue wherever they might be injured. If you are a person who has allergies, a similar thing is happening. So histamines can be released in response to any sort of foreign thing. So it might literally be a bacteria, or it might just be like dander or pet hair or something like that. And if you think about the inflammation response, it's similar to a runny nose. We are leaking fluids, it's red, it's painful, and you might take Benadryl, which is an antihistamine, to be able to stop that. But basically, Benadryl causes the capillaries to constrict and reverses what happens. Let's talk about that in a little bit more detail. So this is like an example of what's going to happen. So this poor person has a nail stuck into them, and I can see that the nail has some green bacteria stuck to it. So it penetrated our first line of defense, and now we're going to see the second line of defense try to take over and help. The first thing that happens is leukocytosis. Leukocytosis is an increase in the number of white blood cells. So white blood cells are produced in our bone marrow, and they are basically going to leave the bone marrow and enter the blood vessels where we need them. After that, marginization occurs. The margins are another name for the walls of the capillary. So, margination refers to the white blood cells sticking to the wall of the capillary. And this is a signal to the other white blood cells like, hey, this is the place, this is where the injury is, this is what we need to do. And they're able to do this because the damaged capillary wall secretes CAMs, CAMS, cell adhesion molecules. So wherever there are CAMs, which are not shown in this diagram, but if you can imagine CAMs right there, then that tells the white blood cell where to start sticking. After they have found the right spot, diapedesis occurs. So that's the ability of white blood cells to basically flatten themselves and sneak out in between the walls of the capillary. And that's a good thing because we want them to leave the blood vessel and go to the site of injury. And then how do the white blood cells find the injured spot? They use chemotaxis. So basically, it's kind of like they can smell the inflammatory chemicals and it leads them to the injured spot where the neutrophils will eat the pathogens. And then eventually the macrophages are going to arrive too because they're larger. It takes them a little bit more time. And we would see a little bit of pus or exudate. That's a sign of infection. And that would be like the bodies of the dead bacteria and dead neutrophils and dead macrophages. But pretty cool. All right. Continuing our conversation about the second line of defenses, we're going to talk about some more chemicals, starting with antimicrobial proteins. One type of antimicrobial proteins are called interferons. Their function is to signal to nearby cells that haven't been infected yet to protect them. So they're called interferons because they interfere with the viral application in still healthy cells. Let's try to find that in this diagram. So over here, this is our first cell, and unfortunately, a virus has infected that cell. So this cell is sick and it's going to die, but the sick cell starts producing interferons. And then the interferons are going to bind to nearby cells, and when they bind, it's like a warning, like, hey, you need to make antiviral genes so you can't get infected. And then this healthy cell makes the antiviral genes, and then it never gets infected. So, interferons, pretty friendly. Another chemical I want to talk about is complement proteins. Here is a diagram of complement proteins. So they are these little kind of red things here. They kind of look like platelets, and they can do three main things that we're going to talk about. The first thing they can do is called opsonization. So over here, this green thing, that's a piece of bacteria. And if you can see, there's all these like kind of little darker green things stuck to it. Those darker green things are the complement proteins. So complement proteins bind to pathogen, and when they're all like bound to it like that, it makes it a more obvious target. Like if you could picture a bacteria with nothing on it versus a bacteria with like a whole bunch of little flags on it, that allows the macrophage to be able to see all the little flags. So opsonization signals the macrophage what needs to be destroyed. Another really cool thing that the complement proteins do is they form this thing that's called MAC, M-A-C. It stands for membrane attack complex. And this MAC will bind to an infected cell and make a hole in it. And then the hole is a place where basically poison can be inserted in and it causes death. And then finally, the complement proteins are able to enhance the inflammation response, so calling more histamines that makes our blood vessels more permeable and helps attract more phagocytes. One more chemical that we need to talk about is fever. So a fever is a high body temperature that inhibits microbes from multiplying. And when macrophages are exposed to foreign substances, they release pyrogens. The pyrogens are able to signal to the body's thermostat in the hypothalamus that we basically need to turn up the heat. Pyro means fire. Oh, and this is kind of interesting. Everything we've talked about so far before fever, that's all been a local response. Like inflammation only happens in the area where you get cut. But a fever affects your entire body because it raises your body temperature everywhere. So this is considered a systemic response. So this is why this is kind of like the last one of the second line of defense. Like hopefully the skin could keep it out. But if not, hopefully the cells and chemicals could keep it out. But if still not, finally, now we have the whole body involved. And then after this is when we would bring the innate system in. So here's a little summary. We split innate into surface barriers that consists of our mucous membranes and skin. And then we split our internal defenses into cells and chemicals. Please let me know what questions you have.